Makes sense to put the PowerPoint up.
Yeah, let's go through it. It won't be long, Mayor, and
It'll give a good context for the rest of the conversation, I think.
Okay. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the. All right. Thanks, Josiah. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to our next school budget meeting. We had a meeting last night. A presentation was made by Dr. Kerbal and Mr. Scanlon, our school business manager. There were some changes that were made, some discrepancies that were fixed. So I wanted to turn it back over to Dr. Kerbal, you and your team. I know there was some changes that were made and also some slides. So I'll turn it over to you.
okay. Thank you, Mayor, and I want to say hello to the school committee. We appreciated the collaborative effort last night. It'd be great to help us out again today. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about the budget. I'm going to talk about some grants. I'm going to ask Chris and Carla to talk about grants with me. Okay, then we'll shift back to Joe, and Joe will go over the budget pages and answer any questions that you have. And I expect Dr. Vidal to join us a little bit later on. So, all right, Chris, just go to the slides, please. And while you're doing that, while you're setting it up, I want to thank Joe again. Joe has been worked last night, worked all day today, and pretty much team effort. And I'll talk about that as we go on. Let's go to, thanks, Chris, right to number 7. So this picks up where we left off. I just want to go back a little bit over the fact that we had a level service budget. We would typically think about level service budget at about 80.5 million. That's just taking this year's budget, turning it over, and add about a 4 to 5% increase to get to the 80. We take out the $2.5 million that was moved to the city side for the custodians, okay, which brought the target budget to 74.8 million. Next slide, Chris. So team effort adjustments that we made in order to hit the target budget. And so far with you, which is a question I asked, what did we do to make adjustments to minimally impact the education of Peabody students? So check and recheck for accuracy of salaries. And we kept talking about Mr. Olympio today because we know he zooms in on those numbers. And so I would say Joe spent all morning working with Chris. And then as a team, all 6 of us looked at, and for several hours, we went through every line item again to make sure that salaries were accurate. However, if you see something, please bring us to our attention so that we can make the adjustment. Another adjustment that we did make was utilize the savings from the retirement. So we had 16 retirements, and Steve, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but 16 retirements. And we said, okay, if somebody's making 90,000, we bring somebody, a new teacher in with a master's degree, makes about 55,000. So we utilized those savings to help us. We looked at the enrollment, okay, and in some cases we moved the class from 3 to 2, but in other places we had to add because of the enrollment. So we monitor those enrollments. That makes sense. And we kept within the contract for the teachers. We looked at reorganizing some positions to save there. We're still working with the union presidents and make that happen. And we did consolidate some programs, mostly in special ed, where that made sense. And we're keeping our eye on that, make sure we're doing the right thing. And Carla's right on top of that, so we appreciate her work and effort. We did there's a lot of moving of positions to the grants, mostly paraprofessionals. I'm going to show you that a little later on. Some positions were eliminated. And what we did is for people who had dual certification or it made sense, we transferred staff to minimize people losing positions or losing their jobs. Next slide. I talked about this, but the reason why I'm showing this again is it's significant because I keep saying, well, how are we making this happen? And it all starts from the FY19 grants. So we had money left over from our FY19 grants, and we used that to pay for expenses in FY20, especially tuition costs. And so we use those funds that will be left over for FY20 to carry those into FY21, and that helps us in terms of offset some expenses. Next slide. So one of the questions that we ask ourselves is, okay, how many positions were actually deleted from the budget? And so I don't want to say which positions, because we're still talking to people. Things change, everything's fluid, especially talking with the school committee tonight. But there were 8 full-time teaching positions. There were 2 full-time positions in Unit B, that's the administrative track. And then Unit C, that's the paraprofessionals, there were 12 full-time paraprofessionals, 12 part-time. And talking to Steve today, we double checked. I called them about 15 minutes ago to make sure that we know that some of those people that would lose their positions will be able to transfer into other positions that are open. This tends to be transient, tend to have a turnover, which is a natural turnover. So we try to take advantage of the turnover that way so we can keep people. There are some people that were laid off. We know that. There were some people that were non-renewed, and we know that. Let's move to the positions that will move to the grant. So we took all of our kindergarten paraprofessionals, 24, we moved them to the elementary and secondary school emergency relief fund. That's what the ESSER stands for. And I believe that amount was somewhere around I don't have the exact number. I know Josh does because he quotes it all the time, $832,000, something like that. But we do have to share those funds with the private schools. So we have 13 paraprofessionals moved to the 240 grant, which is the IDEA, Special Education Grant, and the preschool grant, which is also under special ed. We moved 2 paraprofessionals to that grant. So 15 paraprofessionals still working, and we keep looking at this. The other thing we're managing is the benefits. Carl is looking at the benefits. And so one of the things I want to say is the reason why we're using the paraprofessionals, not teachers, is because we save on the retirement fund that we have to put in the grants. This way we don't have to do that. The grants itself, Chris, next page. Okay, so there are 4 title grants and an IDA grant, and Chris and Carl will talk a little bit about these grants in a minute. So the Title I grant is that's close to $1 million, but that's for supplemental services, and that really is for to supplement what the district does not provide. Title II allows us to use money for professional development, and Title III is geared mostly for English language learners. We use that money to pay staff for summer school, some supplies and materials, and to provide professional development. Title IV primarily is for professional development. Chris talked about with me today that we utilize the money also to pay for AP exams for students. And then the IDA pays for special education support throughout the district. And in terms of the ESSER grant, next slide, Chris, we 24 kindergarten paraprofessionals, which I mentioned. We had 11 teaching fellows in which we contracted with Endicott College. at $18,500 each, no benefits. So we kept those in the ESSER grant. We needed a block of money for technology and equipment, especially with remote learning. We absolutely need to keep current. And I know that Chris Mitchell talked today with Joe. We talked with Josh, talked with me. Okay, we have to assure that department that we're going to have to keep them current because they're going to have to lead us. We have to go remote, and that's the future. So, and then I mentioned before funding for private schools, Bishop Fenwick, St. John's the Baptist Elementary School, that are both in Peabody. And just want to be, and Chris, would you talk a little bit about the title grants, and then we'll go to Carla, and then we'll go back to Joe.
Sure. Can you hear me when I speak and I'm sharing? Can you hear me? I haven't done a share and speak at the same time.
Yes.
Okay, great. So the title grants are broken into 4 parts. I can go back to the previous slide just to highlight some of this. The supplemental services, some of the things that are in that grant. We had our ESL teachers in there. However, we moved them out and put the paraprofessionals in there. There are special professional development opportunities for teachers in the Title I schools. Title I monies are only available for students in needy schools that are more than a certain percentage of free and reduced lunch. And the 5 elementary schools that are involved with that are supposed to be supplemental services. That's what supplemental services means. It means that the baseline for all the elementary schools is the same, and then the needy students in the schools that have the high free and reduced lunch numbers, those folks get this Title I funding in addition to. So additional staff is added here, math specialists, reading specialists, for example. We have English tutors in there, math tutors in there, and they are covered with the Title I grant. The Title II Professional Development Grant, pretty self-explanatory. Many of our teachers take advantage of professional development opportunities throughout the course of the year and during the summer. Part of the teacher's contract reimburses the staff for those activities that they're engaged with on their own accord. We also have a number of speakers come in and train our teachers over time with respect to the curriculum that's new at hand, variety of different professional development opportunities. This summer, we have a good deal of curriculum development going on between the middle and high school. The NEASC accreditation visit spoke to the need for us to keep moving with our curriculum. The high school is about 60% done. And I'm really pleased to say there's a great team at the middle and high school together that will be working on mathematics 6 through 12 to really bolster up that program and allow students to access the mathematics program regardless of grade 6, 7, 8, and jump into one of the pathways for grade 9 that will hopefully get them into calculus by the time they leave. Anyway, the math team is part of that professional development group over the summer. The English language learners in our district, they are in several different categories here. Not only is EL summer school, we have 8 classrooms of remote learning going on this summer for the English language learner students. We have 1 classroom remote learning going on at the high school. Professional development for the English language learner teachers is in there. There's also supplies for the English language learner students in that line. And also several of the schools have morning English language learning and afternoon English language learning. So students can come in early before elementary school and spend some time with their English learner teacher. Title IV, professional development. You saw a marvelous strategic plan a couple of days ago that really illustrated the future for Peabody schools. And the consultant, for example, that walked us through that process over the last 2 years is paid for with that professional development. Contracted services are there. And also there are roughly 500 AP exams that happen at the high school. Students that are needy can have their AP exams at least partially covered through the Title IV grant. And those are the kinds of things that you find in Title IV. I can't see if anyone's raising your hand. Are there any questions about title grants? Okay.
All right, let's, Carla, can you jump in and talk about the IDA grant?
Sure. So the IDEA grants, there are actually 2 of them. One covers preschool only. That's a relatively small portion of the grants, about 62,000 this year in early childhood grants. The early childhood grants previously funded the preschool director's position. Those funds were adjusted this year because along with that, we lost about 6,000 of that to an extra MTRS cost center. With that move, we're able to move three of the paraprofessionals into the grant, and also provide for the purchase of some needed equipment for some medically fragile students that we have coming up. So that's a real positive to be able to have that savings and be able to make that equipment available. The grants themselves are intended specifically to improve services to special education. They're supplemental in nature, so we can't use them to replace other pieces. However, there is some movement that can take place. We've always had some of our paraprofessionals paid for within the grant, and previously we had some of our teachers paid for in the grant, teachers and some Unit B staff as well, partial Unit B staff. We took the teachers and the Unit B staff out of the grant as well. That was a much more substantial savings within the grant and allowed us to put more of the paraprofessionals within the grant and still in compliance with the grant regulations to supplement those services. We're, with the additional 2019 funds that were not spent down, each of these grants are able to be carried for 2 years. So with those additional 2019 funds, we were able to pay some of the tuitions that are outstanding for the coming year, and a reduction to the tuitions that will be paid out of the grant this year. And that will allow us next year to be able to move some of those benefits into the grant. The grant also covers things like tuition, contracted services that are unexpected and not really something that the district is able to plan for in advance. For instance, the occasional audiology assessment or the occasional feeding consultation for students that require specialized services of that sort. So some of those things that we really don't have internal staff to be able to address. Any questions about the IDEA grants?
Okay, Mayor Betancourt, we'll shift it back to Joe. If the school committee wants to ask Joe any questions or Joe wants to make a few statements, we can do
Through
that.
the chair, Jared Hockman has his hand raised.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I can't see anybody. So.
I raised it late, Mark. I'm sorry. I just wanted to ask Carla a question. The IDEA grants, those are pretty stable, aren't they?
They are pretty, through the chair, yes, they are pretty stable over the last couple of years. So FY19, we received about 60,000. FY20, we received about 62,000 in the early childhood grant. And in the 240 grant, 1,814,000 in 240 last year, 1,848,000 this year. It is based on population. However, it's also based on state appropriations. So while they've been pretty consistent, we have been put on notice to expect a decrease in those this year.
If I may continue, Mr. Mayor.
Please go ahead.
Through you to Ms. Chioda. Have we historically put paraprofessional salaries in the IDEA grant?
Yes, we have. We've increased the number of paraprofessional salaries, but that has been consistent. I have records going back 4 years, and that's been a consistent cost for the last 4 years.
I'm sorry, I have my connection keeps going in and out. Can you repeat that?
Absolutely. So yes, I have records for the last 4 years of the grants that have been written, and in the last 4 years, and I would assume prior to that as well, some paraprofessionals have been paid out of the grant. It's been pretty consistent that the number of paraprofessionals paid out of the grant has increased over time. And although benefits have not been paid, it would be consistent with the priorities of the grant to move those benefits to the grant as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Thank you, Mrs. Chioda. And Yeah, so do we want to turn it over to Mr. Scanlon? Mr. Scanlon, anything you want to talk about? Any changes from yesterday's presentation that you wanted to mention?
Well, I'm going to grab the screen. What I'm going to do is just to wrap up the conversation with the grants and the revolving funds. I'm going to show you my part of it, but we're not going to stay on these two slides very long. These are the numbers parts of the grants and revolving funds. This, when we finish this, you'll get this chart. It details all the grants that cover all the title grants, all the IDEA. We also have a couple community grants that are based out of Peabody School District. They're employees, but they work for the community. And we also have the Perkins grant. So that's one thing. We're going to be getting this ESSR grant next year, which is $819,000. I'll show you another chart quickly. These are all the revolving funds. There's a lot of them. You can see the activity. It's like $4.5 million in and out. This is 2 years ago, 19. And we'll go through each one of those and break down what the activity is in each one of those grants. So I just wanted to show you those two because there are numbers behind the grants and the revolving funds. So this is the book that Marjorie delivered on horseback around to your houses. This is you see version 6, so we're trying. And what I'll do is I highlighted everything that changed, so I'll comment on them as we go through. First page is the same. These enrollment numbers, as I mentioned, it's like yesterday's newspaper. You know, they're constantly changing. So we'll always be talking about enrollment numbers. The total budget, you see the bottom line, it's $74,848,000. Yesterday's number was $74,822,000. So we went up $25,000, but we're still in the range. There were 9 changes. I'll mention them, either tick them off, but we're not going to look at them here. We'll look at them each school level. First one is Carroll Elementary. The number changed by, dropped about 50,000. We'll tell you why. The next two are right next to each other, McCarthy and South. They both also changed, smaller amounts, 20, 30,000. Middle of the chart here, West Elementary actually went up 100,000. Toward the bottom of the chart, the high school went up also, and also vocational went up a good chunk of money. You see that amount there. I'll explain why. On the lower part of the chart, athletics went down, and that was an arithmetic error on my part. I'll explain it to you. The special education went up $100,000, and the central administration went down. So overall, all that activity up and down, were 25,000 higher than last night. So on to staff budgets. This is the majority of the changes. You can see that we're up about roughly 90,000 if you have yesterday's handy. And then in the ordinary budgets, we're down about 40 to offset the difference, getting somewhere near about a $25,000 increase. So we'll jump back into the schools and I'll highlight what we fixed. This is actually, we got off to a good start. Brown, there was nothing that jumped out that needed to be addressed. So with some minor adjustments, we have a 9.5 change, which is the same from before. Overall, this number went up about 5,000. Those are minor adjustments. The charts, we made a few changes at the bottom. What we did is we compared the number of teachers for each year to the number of FTEs up here, just as a double check to make sure that I was keeping all the class sizes up to date. There was no change from last night. They were all 18 and 18. Class sizes numbers are all the same. All the demographic information has changed. We know it's accurate because Chris Lord did it. So it's worth talking about. There's a number of issues in these schools, and obviously Brown is one. High needs, higher than the district in the state, economically disadvantaged, right in the same range. And special education is a high percentage in the Brown school. So that's just going over changes from yesterday to today. Anybody want to talk, ask any questions about the Brown School? Okay, moving on to Burke. There were a few things that we corrected. Line 2006 is our instructional, I'm sorry, 2007 is our music. What we did, it was showing a decrease of 36. It was updated. It's nothing that changed in 21. It was the 20 number that needed to be fixed. So it's a standard step and grade. And then the lower part, the other change was in the guidance. It was another drop of about 90, but what it was is this number was not correct. So we've tied those back to the main databases, the number, bottom line, exactly the same as yesterday. All these FTEs are the same, one class size number. I didn't have correct grade 4. I had grade 4 next year with 3 teachers, but it's only going to be 2 teachers. So any questions? You can see there's the one change. It was 14 total teachers and 13 total teachers, which is this decrease up here. Any questions on?
Yeah, I have a quick question, Mr. Mayor. My else, long-term and short-term substitutes. Can you just explain that figure a little bit?
Sure. What we've done over the years is that the substitute accounts, we've struggled with having enough money in those, so you could see previously there was one account that was budgeted. And then last year, Mike Gingras established 2 new accounts at many of the schools, long-term substitutes and short-term substitutes. And we started off this year, he gave us this much money, so we're just adjusting it in for this amount, getting it up to the standard of really what the charges are equivalent to this year. So even though it's increasing, all it's doing is getting to the level of the spending we need. Mike has been extremely helpful addressing these substitute accounts over the last couple of years.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Scanlon, Beverly Dunn has her hand raised.
Yes, Mrs. Dunn, I'll turn it to you.
Oh, thank you. Through you to Mr. Scanlon. On the Burke School Guidance Line 2018, it's saying that there are 9 FTEs.
Oh, brother.
I know that's an error.
Yeah. Yep, it has no impact on the budget. It's just not the right number. They're both should be 1.
Okay.
Thank you, Beverly. Excuse me. Thank you, Mrs. Dunn.
You're welcome.
Sorry.
It's okay, Joe. Don't worry.
I know.
I know. The formalities are awful.
Okay. All right, we're moving on to Carol. There were a few changes.
Mr. Scanlon?
Yes, sir.
Through the chair to you, on those 2 lines that Mr. Olympio addressed, 2013 and 2014, are we anticipating some greater need for long-term substitutes at the Burke School that we didn't in the past?
No, again, if I didn't explain it correctly, this dollar amount, roughly 125,000, 130,000, that's how much we're actually spending this year. So we've had to put more money into these accounts. We're just trying to get the accounts up to the level of what we've actually been spending.
I understand how you explain that to Mr. Olympio.
Okay.
Are you saying we were over budget on lines 2013 and 2014 in fiscal year 20?
Not well. I understand it's the budgets were overspent, but that's what we've been trying to do is identify what the budgets need to be. It's just something historically that the district, we have not done a good job budgeting our substitute accounts. So they ran in deficit in all locations all year round. And then at the end of the year, we would transfer money in to cover those accounts. It's really just last year that Mike Gingras helped establish budgets in the substitute accounts. And then we're asking to increase them to match the level that we're spending.
I appreciate, again, through the chair to you, Mr. Scanlon, I appreciate that. And I thought we addressed this our historic underfunding of substitute lines in last year's budget. So that's one of the reasons I'm surprised to see this significant jump in these two lines for the Burke School. And secondly, these two budget lines don't seem to have nearly as dramatic of a change in any other elementary school. So I'm wondering if there's something going on specifically at the Burke that we're now addressing.
Okay, I understand that is a specific question. I didn't speak to that. Off the top of my head, there are occasions, as you can imagine, that teachers are out on long-term issues, and we do have to replace them with long-term subs, and we are needing to pay those salaries. So if it, I mean, a 20,000 salary is, maybe half a year for a long-term sub. So we can look into that. I can't address it tonight, though.
Yeah. Yeah, if you can, because that just seems to be an anomaly among.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Through the mayor,
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Farrell.
I might be able to help out. So, what Joe is trying to get to is that last year or prior years, each school will go through phases of staff going out on leaves, whether permanent subs are needed or long-term subs. So to specifically say it's just the Burke, that may have been when we took a snapshot of the budget need. What Joe cannot actually do is if, for example, the center school, this FY21 needed more subs and the Burke did not, he can just transfer from the line over to the school that needs the substitutes. So I don't think this is a specific school situation. This is a placeholder for that budget line for now until the year starts. I don't know if that helps out, Mr. Hoffman.
No, again, through the chair to Mr. Farrell, I appreciate that. And that's what we used to do. We kind of got away from that. We used to have one budget line for substitutes, and we got away from that so that we would be able to better support schools and better understand the substitute expenditures within each school. So if you're saying that there's going to be some increase district-wide because of a need, I can understand that. That's just not how it's reflected, at least in the budget.
Okay, I do understand the questions that you're asking. We'll have to take a look at it because overall, globally, our substitute accounts, we are getting to the level to match our spending. There are decrease I can show you in the district office, but you're right. This needs to be pulled all aside, and I think your questions are more directed at the spending within those accounts as the purpose of the spending versus the budget actually themselves. So we will follow up on that.
Mr. Scanlon, if I may, I think to Mr. Hockman's point, in all the other elementary schools, we combined it into one line. And in this one, we're showing the old model of a long and a short. And so if we scroll through the other ones, there's one budget line for substitute teachers in each of the other elementary schools. I think that's what he's talking about as far as the anomaly. So it's something that we'll have to look at.
Yeah,
Okay.
Dr. Vidalia, that's part of it. But none of the other budget lines that show one line per school have any
Dramatic increases like this one.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Right. Yep. I got
I
it.
think we understand. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Hockman. And I did have a question for you, Mr. Scanlon. And I just want to get some clarification on that line 2018. Because it does say guidance, and I understand that looks like there's a typo here, but I guess I want to make sure that how many guidance counselors do we have at the Burke?
Yeah, it's just one. That's Mrs. Dunn had pointed that out. It's
Is there a school adjustment counselor there as well?
actually, yeah, I'm sorry. The school adjustment counselor is now, it's in that salary. So
That's why
it should be
it would
two,
a
not
lot for
one. Right.
It'd be a large salary.
Because it's the same in the FY21 budget line. It's the same as 2016 and 2018 are the same. They're both listed at $185,809.
And I'm sorry, I'm not following it. In which two lines are you referring to?
2016 and 2018. 2016 and 2018, they're the same number, 185,809.
The paraprofessionals,
Yeah, paraprofessionals listed at 185,809. One guidance at 185,809.
oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. I will check that. All right, any other questions on Burke?
Actually,
Actually,
yep, go ahead, Ms. Dunn.
Please go
thank
ahead,
you,
Mrs. Dunn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just through you to Mr. Scanlon or Dr. Vidala, are the school adjustment counselors under the guidance line in every building? Or are they under special education?
Oops, I'm sorry. I was gonna start opening the school file. Sorry, I started opening my,
So I believe that one is, I looked back at a historical page that Mr. Scanlon had sent me, and it looks as though there's one FTE under guidance in Burke in the original document, and it was about a $95,000 line. So I think we can look at that one. It might just be pulling, as Mayor Betancourt said, if the exact number to the dollar of another cell, it might just be pulling the wrong cell where there's 9 paraprofessionals that are a combined salary for 185,809. So I think that's an area. There is one guidance counselor there. I don't believe there is a school adjustment counselor. In some of the other budgets, they may be combined. But I think at the Burke Elementary School, we have one FTE there. So that should be about half of that, or about 90,000 less.
Yeah, I'll be honest, it looked like it was a typo that it had just pulled that same number down from the paraprofessionals. But yeah, as far as guidance, my understanding would be that there was just one FTE under guidance in each of the elementary schools.
it is,
Yeah, that's what it is.
Okay.
Yeah, and I just want to make sure that number is correct, because that's $100,000 difference. And I just want to make sure that I don't know if that 185 now changes all of these numbers. So that's why I just want to make sure that that's a potential $100,000 difference.
I will check. That's why I started opening the file, but I won't do that. I believe it is what Dr. Vidala said is correct. It's linked to the wrong field. It will be in the range of a $90,000 salary. So about half that amount. It will come down $80,000 to $90,000.
Okay. Any other questions on the Burke School?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Hockman.
Actually, if we can go back to the Samuel Brown School. So I have 3 questions. The first one's on line 1005. And I'm just seeing the same FTE with it's not, none of these are big dollar amounts, but they're big percentage amounts for this type of budget. There's a 10.1% increase. Are we changing a staff member there or?
No, that actually is one that I did check, and it is accurate. It's just the position of the step and grade for that individual teacher.
And same questions for line 1010.
I did look at all those because I wanted to make sure that things were reasonable. That one does seem, I would swear that it's consistent with the step and grade, because I highlighted them. I have last night's presentation, so I did look at it. I will double check it.
Yeah, and then thank you. And if we can just get some sort of response to that when you have an opportunity, I'd appreciate it.
Sure.
Line 1020. Again, it's a small dollar amount, but it's a large increase.
Yeah, correct. I mean, what she made the decision, Mrs. King made the decision to do is to lower the textbook account, because we do have the ability, we have that capital fund for textbooks. So she lowered that. So it is an increase. It's just the percentage, even though it's a small amount, 2,000 compared to 9,000 is a 25% increase. So.
Okay, so can we then just adjust line 1021?
Oh, it's not going down. Okay. I see.
Well, the dollar amount went down, but the percentage change doesn't.
Correct. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it looks like she just moved from textbooks over to, or took it from textbooks to put it over to supplies.
Yeah, no, I see that now. There was no percentage change in the textbook line, so I didn't see that initially.
Yep, that makes sense.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Scanlon, I'll go back to you.
To Burke, we went through. I'll scroll through to Carol unless anybody wants me to go back. So at Carol, there were some changes. The first one is the 3006, the general instruction line. There is a decrease, but the difference was very low, and it had to do with this number, the 90 number, the 20 number not being correct. So that's been adjusted. There's no change in the bottom number here. The other one was a physical education. All those teachers have percentages. So I think last night I had a higher percentage and it went up about 60,000, but it didn't. It just had the wrong number here. It had a lower number here. So no impact on the 21 budget. There were some miscellaneous changes. So overall it drops slightly, but it's very consistent with the overall budget. Same number of FTEs, same number of class sizes, no changes except for the 5th grade. We had a 4 here, and it needs to be 5 to match the number. All the economics, demographics have been updated. High needs, economically disabled, English language learner, and special ed. You see the percentages all are higher at Carroll than they are for the district and for the state. Any questions on Carroll? All
Go ahead,
right.
Mr. Scanlon.
Okay, I'll scroll through and we can always go back. The center school, there were a number of other corrections. Overall, the exact same number from last night. All the changes had to be just the wrong numbers that were shown here. First line was the kindergarten. It was showing a decrease of about, kindergarten is line 4003, it was showing a decrease about $700. So that's been corrected. The next one is the art and, the general instruction was showing an increase. It has been updated because there are additional positions changes. There are other changes for ELL and physical education, the same types of issues that we had with phys ed, the percentages at some of the other buildings, but they're now into the range of more, standard step and grade. Any other questions, comments on center?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor. Yeah.
Go ahead, Mr. Olympio.
Yeah. Line 4010, again,
Sorry.
not a huge increase. I mean, not dollar wise, but 12.5% increase. Is that COLA?
Yeah. What those things are happening is it's the same FTE percentage, but it's of a teacher with a higher salary. So it's the same number of hours allocated to the building. It's just a different teacher that gets paid a higher salary than the ones that were there last year.
Okay, so it's a different teacher, because it's only, let me see if I'm reading it right.
Yep, I flag it. I will go over it, double show it to Steve and to Josh. I'm sure that's what it is.
Okay.
It's not a higher paid salary individual. It's just a higher paid person.
Okay, so, yeah, that's what I'm asking. Is it the same person for FY20 versus FY21? If it's a different person, then, okay, that would make some sense to me. If it wasn't, if it was the same person both years, then I just question the increase. Okay, thank you.
Was that on a specific line?
Yeah, 4,010.
4,010. Oh, back, still here?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, it's a breakdown when we're able to show you, the school level. As Ms. Smoke last night, we can't share the salary charts with you because there's a lot of personal, information on those. So when you see the breakdown of the staffing, those things can be explained.
Okay.
All right,
Okay, thank you.
okay, down,
Mr. Mayor,
still on center, I'm just going to talk about the enrollment numbers down here. There was a match of the FTEs. There is a change in class sizes. This was 3 last night, but it's actually 4 for the kindergarten. So everything is still within the correct class size. And then these percentages are updated, and this is, center is another school that the high needs percentages are very high. Economically disabled is very high. English language learners are very high. And then special ed percentage is lower than the district and the state average. So, and before I move off center, any other questions on the budget itself?
Mr. Mayor. Through the mayor to Mr. Scanlon.
Please go ahead, Mr. Hockman. Sorry.
Thank you. That's okay. To Mr. Olympio's point, on line 4010, if we're seeing a new physical education teacher at the center school, which causes an increase in salary based upon that teacher's step and lane, are we going to see a corresponding decrease in a physical education line at a different school?
That's a very good question. And we don't look at it that way. I can. Just as I was thinking as we were talking about the substitutes, I can pull all the substitute lines together and compare those. I'll do that with all the physical education lines.
Yeah.
It is the same number of people. We haven't changed the staff. So the percentages of where hours attended at each building, I'm sure they're going to have to wash out to themselves.
Yeah, I mean, simply stated, if you can identify this new teacher at the center and what building they came from and who's replaced them, that may simply provide us with the solution. But I'm happy to see it as you're describing as well.
Okay.
And then another question, and this might be for Dr. Vidala or Dr. Kerbel, I'm not sure who. The center school, as we see, is above the district percentage for high needs. It's above the district percentage in economically disadvantaged. It's double the district percentage in English language learners. And we, in 2019, 2020, had kindergarten class sizes of 24. Dr. Kerbel has, continued to preach, and I appreciate it, that you learn a lot in kindergarten, and 24 kids is a lot, particularly with these demographics. Well, we're now taking that same cohort and moving them to first grade and keeping them in class sizes of 24. And that's just a little troubling for me. And perhaps that's something we can look at later on in budget discussions. Similarly, for what will be grade 2 at the center school, 23.3 is still a little high when we're talking K to 2. So if we can maybe look at that and talk about that before we conclude the budget.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question. Joe.
Go ahead, Mr. Amico.
Thank you. Through the chair to Mr. Scanlon, on the center school, if we could, and I think it was talked about on the phys ed position, if that is the same teacher and it is a step lane, then that seems a significant one. If it is a replacement or a transfer, then as Mr. Hockman said, we should be able to see it from another building. And on another building, the Burke School, I did a little research here, and I have the Burke actually has one full-time guidance counselor and a 0.8 SAC there as well. So maybe that's where there was a little bit of confusion there. Maybe we can just double check that as well.
Okay, I have that flagged.
Thank you, Joe.
Okay, and I will pull all the phys ed teachers together because this has my curiosity. It's nobody's getting this raise. It's just instead of John this year, it's Mary, and Mary earns more than John. That's what you're seeing. But we'll follow up with that specifically. So on to McCarthy. We made one change here, this number that dropped. What it is that we have a teacher that is retiring. Initially, we were going to just carry the salary forward, but we've adjusted the salary to a lower incoming salary. There were only a few that we had kept them at the original number. So that's what that adjustment is here. Overall reductions for the paras going to the grant and the custodians going to the city. This number here is 20K lower than last night. That number is 20K lower. All of the enrollment numbers have been trued up, 17 teachers, including the preschool. That's one of the things, if wherever you see the preschools are not in the general fund budget. They're in grants and revolving funds. So these teachers are not part of these FTEs up here. All of these have been updated. High needs students, very high. Here at McCarthy, economically in the range. English language, a little bit lower. Special ed, very high at McCarthy.
Mr. Scanlon, before you move on, I'm having some comments from the folks that are watching. There seems to be a strip of pictures of multiple picture videos on the right-hand side of what people are seeing online. I'm not sure if that's on your screen or if that's something that's being controlled somewhere else, but it's blocking the numbers on the right-hand columns. It's a strip of all the participants on the right-hand side. I don't know if you're seeing that on your screen or not, but it is occluding
If I may, Dr. Lord?
Yep.
That's on the part of the folks that are watching. And there is an icon in the top right-hand corner that can be clicked to reduce to just the speaker in the top right-hand corner.
Yep, that was my understanding too, and we tested it, and what's happening is it's live streaming the strip. The person can't control just that to that one box.
It's been corrected.
It has? Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, McCarthy, any questions? The integrated preschool here is large, so when we get around to talking about revolving funds, there's a lot of activity there. I'm sorry, question?
Yep. Mr. Scanlon?
Yes.
Through the mayor to you, in regard to the ordinary budget lines at the McCarthy,
Mm-hmm.
Can we just maybe review these? I'm not sure. Are there? It can't be that there's no money spent on library books or equipment.
Yes, unfortunately, those budgets have been taken out. I mean, the line probably shouldn't even be here, or there may have been money in 17 or 18. But it's all the budget has been consolidated into a few accounts. You know, I personally have an interest in looking at per pupil spending, and all of our schools are very low compared to other districts. But that's the challenge of 19. You know, there's a lot of the budgets that had to be reduced, and these budgets all were almost double this in 18 and prior years. So we agree with you. Unfortunately, we just can't put money back into these lines. We want to focus on the principal's office and getting some items in that they haven't been keeping up with. More traditional office supplies.
Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate that. I'm looking at other elementary schools and I see funding for textbooks and library books. Not a lot, not as much as we all want, but just not to single out any school, but the Burke School and the McCarthy, I think, have similar enrollment, and there's probably percentage-wise, in terms of the ordinary budget, about a 40% difference between the two schools, and that just seems to be maybe an anomaly, and maybe the numbers are wrong. That's what I'm hoping. You know, this should be relatively consistent per pupil.
I had done some analysis on that a few months ago. I'll pull it out and go over it with Josh. In order to fix those types of things, we have a limited pool of money. So to level out per pupil, some districts' budgets may have to be cut because I don't think we're going to be able to add 20 grand. I've done it in another district. So once we identify a target, you can phase them in over 3 years to get every school down to a $15 per person amount. So the principals are very good with their money. I think what you'll see is sometimes if they don't need office supplies, they won't buy them. And then after a few years, they have to buy them. But once you buy that product, you don't have to buy it again. Textbooks are a priority, replacement books. I mean, they could, I'm sure, go into great detail about why they're spending money in this account and then next year in another account.
I'm not, thank you again, and again through the mayor to you, I'm not questioning how principals allocate money in their building. That's their, I think that's their business and their purview. What I'm saying is that there seems to be dramatically less of a pool of money at the McCarthy than other schools of similar size.
Okay, then in regards to that point, is there is more potential with the revolving fund there. So there could be spending in those supply lines. I'll take a look at that, and if we can get that information to you. As I said, the integrated preschool program is very large at McCarthy, and Mrs. Attoli is excellent at managing the integrated preschool revolving account along with the general fund budget. So we'll take a look at how much she's spending on supplies through that revolving fund as well.
And a point of information, if I may, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, please go ahead, Mrs. Dunn.
Thank you. I believe when we cut all of the elementary school library paraprofessionals, that impacted on the school's plans to purchase library books. And many of them decided not, well, they didn't have the money in their budget to buy library books, so many of them just have stopped, unfortunately.
Understood. I don't want to put Mark or Josh on the spot, but I do remember we started talking about whether we could revisit libraries under the ESSR grant coming out. There are obviously no concrete plans, but it is a focus. We do want to address it, but we just have limited resources.
Right.
Okay, moving on from McCarthy to South. Very few changes here. We made an adjustment on a retirement and a replacement salary. We'd initially, budgeted a little bit higher, but we've dropped it down. I think it dropped by overall, 40. This number here is 40 lower than it was yesterday. Overall totals change of 40. I'll go to the enrollments and we can go back up. These are fairly consistent in grade 3, 6028. What I had was last night 2 teachers in grade 3, but there are 3, and that ties out to the FTE count. All of these percentages have been updated, and it happens at South that South is lower in all of these categories than the district and the state. So I'll scroll back up by the numbers. Any questions, comments on South?
Yep, Mr. Mayor.
Please go ahead, Mr. Olympio.
Yeah, line 6006, is that just a teacher, a high-low issue, teacher retiring and a new person at a lower salary coming in? For the decrease, about 32,000, the FTEs are still the same?
Mr. Olympio, that's 2 positions at exactly what you're describing.
Okay,
Yep, 2 positions
Yeah.
at the South.
okay, thank you.
Okay, no other questions on South. I'll scroll through and we'll.
Hold on, Mr. Scanlon.
Okay.
A few. Can we? And I realize that you've been working around the clock for a long time to put this together. Line 6021, if we can just have a reflection of the percentage change there.
Mm-hmm.
And then to, again, Dr. Vidala, probably, similarly to my concerns at the center school, the kindergarten and first grade class sizes at the South are probably approaching limits that make me uncomfortable.
Absolutely. And I mean, and this is a tough budget season. So in addressing a couple things that you've said, we'd love to lower class size. We're trying to put together the budget within the constraints that we have as best we can. We are looking at things like that. If there is more money that comes down the road, those are things that we definitely prioritize. In terms of the supplies, we level funded pretty much everything around the same thing. We didn't go back and reallocate because we were really focused on positions and trying to use as much money as we could to save jobs and to save people's position. Things like library books, people have been very generous to donate books to our schools. So we have been able to increase the libraries through donations rather than spending allocated funds on books. We were able to put that into salaries and things like that.
Okay, any other questions on South? I'll roll down. We can obviously go back to any school you want. We're at Welch now. Let me turn my page to Welch. I think there was only one that we had a correction previously. It was down adjustment here with the ELL having to do with this number being, this difference was very large because this number was low. No impact on the budget. That number is exactly the same as it was last night. That number is exactly the same. All the class sizes, FTE counts, all tie out. I didn't check this one. It is going up slightly. I don't know why it ended at a decrease. Welch is higher, high need students, economically disabled, English language twice as high, and then in pretty equivalent with the SPED students. So any changes other than the paras moving and the custodians moving, it's same FTE count as the prior. Any questions on Welch?
Yeah, again, that phys ed line, I know you're checking in on it, but I just wanted to point it out at the Welch as well. There's a pretty significant percentage increase. Line 7010.
Oh yeah, it's the physical education again. Okay, let me highlight it. Nobody is getting raises that large. If they are, I'm changing my major. Okay, I'll check it. Any questions on Welch? Scroll down to West.
I'm sorry, nope, I'll wait.
Okay, the made a correction in last year's numbers. Again, for physical education, it was very high and it was showing an enormous increase. These numbers are correct. Just some other miscellaneous adjustment. This one is lower slightly than last night. That has to do with some of the corrections tying all these fields back up again. The overall roughly a little under 100,000 change from last night, same FTEs as before, reductions of positions in some SPED, but kindergarten and custodians. The FTEs, no changes, same FTE counts as last night. All the percentages have been updated. West is a little bit below average of the district and high needs, economically disabled, English language learners, and equivalent with district and state and SPED. Any questions on West School?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, Mr. Olympia.
Yeah, so on line 8010, again, the physical education, why is that figure so low for a salary?
Yeah, it's a percentage, you know, it has to do with this FTE is missing here, but it's 0.2 of a, you know, this is a 0.3 of a salary. So It
Okay.
has to do with I'm sure you understand, it has to do with the number of hours allocated when they come to this school. So is that, you're questioning why it's so low?
Well, yeah, I would just assume that, I mean, the other phys ed positions are, just rounding 50, 60,000, something like that. And then why wouldn't that line be in that ballpark? Is there something different going on at the West?
So, Mr. Olympio, it is an interesting way of budgeting for the physical education because they're
Okay.
shared across multiple buildings.
Okay,
Only one day of this person's salary is allocated to the West. We've
Okay.
talked about possibly next year pulling all of the phys ed and health teachers out and putting them on one budget, if it was athletics and health and wellness, just so you're reflected, you see all the people who are there and they're spread out district wide. They do 2 days at this school and 3 days at that school.
Okay.
So this person's salary is reflected in another school and it's
Gotcha.
the same person. So it is a strange accounting
no,
thing,
that,
but that's the reason why.
all right, thank you. Thank you for clearing that up for me. Okay, thank you.
These are, to couple on Josh's point, within the account number, this column here all reflects what gets reported to the state into the end of the year report and into our foundation budget. Obviously, 4,000 is custodians. Everything that starts with 2 is what we want. It's going into the instructional lines. So the challenge is that we have to put these salaries in the schools because that's where the 2000 series accounts are. But we're going to look at that, maybe budget them out of departments and then ensure that we have a district-wide account that can feed into the end of the year report. Any other questions on West? Minor adjustment and overall percentages. Scroll down onto
I do have a
Higgin. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mrs. Dunn.
I'm sorry. I have a question. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Through you two, I don't know if it would go to Mr. Scanlon or Dr. Vidal or Dr. Kerbal. It's a question on all the elementary schools. The enrollment numbers we have, are those the enrollment of the students who would be attending that school as opposed to actual numbers where we do allow the open enrollment?
So this is actual enrollment. So if FY20, for example, is actual enrollment of kids who attended that school and were reported, regardless of where they live. So
Okay.
that's who attended. That's how many kids are in the seat, how many kids are in front of those teachers. We're projecting the same thing. And as we look at open enrollment, we'll have to make some of those decisions. To Mr. Hockman's point, to your point, if there are increased class sizes and, those are some of the decisions we have to make in July, those are all things that will be on the table.
Okay, thank you. I understand now. Thanks. This is one other question. On the McCarthy, with all the demographic information that's included for each of the elementary schools, are the preschool students included in the McCarthy demographics, or is that the same as every school with K through 5?
I believe it's K to 5.
Okay.
I believe those enrollments are McCarthy K to 5.
Yeah,
Okay.
this enrollment is factored into our foundation budget, but each FTEs for pre-kindergartner, you don't get full funding for that student.
Okay.
So this, as I mentioned, these teachers are paid off the revolving fund. So this number 17 matches here, but
Right.
it doesn't match up here. So the preschool teachers are not listed in this, but preschool is part of the district.
Yep. Very good. Okay, thank you. And then I will bring up a question I had brought up last night. This was about the need for a full-time assistant principal at the center and at the Welch. And what I'm wondering, is that going to be an adjustment that we're going to discuss after this budget is completed, or is that something that will be completed before we do vote on the budget?
That's a good question. I mean, with the budget the way it was, we were trying to do level service at first and then level fund, as Dr. Kerbal mentioned yesterday. So we're pulling a teacher out of a classroom and adding an additional position wasn't something that we were prepared to do within these budget constraints. So we were trying to do everything level this year and do the best we could to preserve as much. by pulling somebody out of the classroom and adding another teacher, then you'd have to cut somewhere else. So we're hoping to just tighten our belts and do what we did this year again next year until we can see a brighter future in the budget.
Okay, so the basis for the budget we have right now is level funding, level services, I should say.
That's what we're trying to do as best we can.
Right, thank you. If I can make a point, people who were watching last night were concerned that we were going to take away assistant principals that are currently in 2 of the elementary schools. And that is not the case. Those 2 assistant principals that are already at 2 of our schools are in this budget, and they will remain. They are not part of my question at all. This was a future increase, just to make that clear.
Right. So you're talking about the elementary schools?
Yes.
Yes, all the elementary schools, we were looking to remain the same as they were last year.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Okay, that was West.
While we're on that point about assistant principals.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Hockman.
Thank you. And this might be a question for Ms. Carpenter. Do we have a contractual obligation with the class sizes as projected in the 2 schools Ms. Dunn identified? That being the Center and the Welch?
I'll be honest, it is, as far as I
Yes,
knew,
I believe it.
contractual obligation. That's why I've been bringing that up.
Yes, I believe it is.
Mr. Mayor, could I on that?
Please,
I-
Mr. Miko.
Sure, I believe, if Mr. Hockman was talking about the center, I believe.
Center and Welch, Mr. Miko,
It's the
yes.
And Welch,
center and the
yes. And where those 2 assistant principals are considered teachers and assistant principals, I believe there is some language in the contract that we may have to look at as well regarding number of students in the building.
Yes. Yes, that was why I brought that up.
Through the chair, Ms. Dunn, you're absolutely right on that. There is language in the contract. I'm not sure what the number is. I believe it could be
400.
400. Yeah, that's it. Yep.
Yep.
Thank you.
I just don't want to scroll too fast. I'm heading back up into
Mayor?
Higgins.
Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Kerbal.
So Mr. Amico is right. The number is 400. And I think we have to go back what Dr. Vidal has said. Adding 2 positions, taking 2 people out of the classrooms and to make them assistant principals, all right, there's a big jump in pay. Okay, and then the backfill, there's another adjustment we'd have to make. I think that would be a serious impact on what we're trying to accomplish over the course of this year. Maybe halfway through the year when funding is better, you can have that discussion. But right now, I think it's, with like Dr. Vidal has said, just trying to just have a level service budget. And that was every decision we make impacts other areas. Thank you.
If I could, Mr. Mayor, on that?
Yes, please.
And through the chair, thank you, Mr. Kerbal. And I totally agree with the budget that we have in front of us, with everything that's going on. If we had to, we definitely would reach out to Unit B and discuss that. And when things get better, absolutely, make right on that. Thank you.
Okay, we're at Higgins. Since we're talking about principals and assistants, you can see they're rolled into the same line here. So this is all step and grade increases. There's absolutely no changes from last night. I had not marked anything that was needed to be investigated. We did update all of the demographics, high needs, consistent, economically disabled, and consistent with district. English language a little bit lower, and special ed. Obviously, what students that are in the elementary grades, they matriculate up through the middle school. So these numbers will change as more students come up from the elementary schools. So there really is nothing to cover at Higgins. I'll stay here for a minute in case anybody has any questions.
Any questions regarding the Higgins?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor,
Go ahead, Mr. Hockman.
for you to, I don't know if this is Mr. Farrell or Mr. Scanlon or Dr. Vidala. Is line 9009, is that a retirement?
in this one here, 9,009.
Yes.
Um,
No, that's a reduction in a reassignment.
And are we, what are we, who's going to fulfill the obligations that staff member had in years past?
A room where you send kids to exclude them from their academics is something that we've looked at to discuss of finding other ways to address those things. I think that we had talked about having a suspension room in the building may not be, if we're looking to trim, that may be the area that we're looking to eliminate, is to address students in a different way and maybe rethink the way that we're addressing students rather than having an in-house room or a room where kids are excluded from their academics.
Thank you, Dr. Fidala. And philosophically, I don't necessarily disagree with you. Or can we expect to see some increase somewhere else short of what's being reduced here for some staff member to fulfill some of those duties?
Yeah, I mean, this is a long internal conversation with Mr. Busey and with Dr. Lord and Mr. Magno at the high school. We're also looking to reduce there as well and rethink the way that we're doing things. I think there are other opportunities to provide kids with different types of interventions rather than a more punitive suspension room type intervention. So we would be looking at different things, but I think the idea of putting kids in a room excluded from their academics is a little bit outdated, and we're trying to rethink the way that we're doing that. So if there has to be a reduction, we think it's a non-academic place is a reasonable place to reduce.
And again, through the chair to you, Dr. Vidala, philosophically, I'm with you. I agree with you. Can you just at some future meeting maybe flesh out what some of those ideas that you and other administrators have in terms of dealing with that population?
Absolutely. I mean, we're looking at, we've done a lot of SEL work, and, we're looking to increase school adjustment counselors and guidance counselors and do more restorative practices. I think all of that really feeds into a philosophical perspective that maybe a suspension teacher sort of contradicts. And I think we can look at some other things. We're going to provide support in professional development around that. But it is a philosophical change. And so we recognize that, but in needing to reduce areas, we felt like this is one that we could stand behind philosophically.
Okay, no other comments, questions on Higgins?
Just a quick comment, if I could.
Go ahead, Mr. Arnottis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Hoffman, thank you for pointing that line out. I had flagged it as well. I just wanted to credit you, Dr. Vidala, for that reduction right now. I do believe that's a wise move. At first, I was curious about what that meant, and I'm glad you fleshed it out here a little bit. I was not personally in that room. I remember seeing that room, and now this was years ago, but it was often a room where students were sent basically to sit for a number of whether it's hours or a few periods throughout the day, and there probably wasn't much activity going on in there. So I hope some of the remedial duties that need to come are going to be in other avenues. It sounds like you're working diligently on that. I know there's been mediation programs that have been coming around, and I just wanted to credit you on that. Thank you for diving into that a little bit. I think that's probably a reduction that once folks learn more about it, there may be some support with that, but I just wanted to give you a little kudos for that, because I think it's a wise move.
Thank you, Mr. Arnottis.
Thank you.
Excellent. So I will go back to you, Mr. Scanlon. I think we're going to the high school next.
I will. High school, there were a few changes. We had initially made a projection of reducing 2 positions in the the principal's office, and that has been, reduced by being increased. So we're only of targeting a budget plan to reduce one position. We had another change down in the world language, not changing the overall 21 budget, but the comparison to the 20 budget. It was a decrease of 164,000. So it's been brought more better in line with the step and grade of the teachers. There are a lot of changes when you see the line items. There's a lot of changes in teachers between in the high school especially. The next line was down in the special ed, which has to do with this line again. No change overall. It was just reporting I think a $359,000 increase, which Carla got excited about, but it was just a mathematical error, so we fixed that. Overall, this number is higher than yesterday. It's roughly 160 higher. Vast majority of that is up in this position. Overall budget has been shown with an increase of, even though it's still a decrease, another FTE, and about 170 higher down here. I'll scroll back up, but just the demographics have been updated. The high school is fairly consistent with the district and the state in all of these categories. I'll scroll back into the main budget pages. Not too many changes at the high school, except at the very top line. Any questions, comments on the high school budget?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor?
Go ahead, Mr. Olympio.
Yeah, just a couple of lines, just really a couple of comments. Line, what's that, 1007, the science teacher line, like the percentage change is 10.6. Is that step and lane issue?
Okay, I didn't pick up on that last night.
Yeah, and then,
I'll check that, yeah.
Yeah, and then 1008, we're adding an art teacher. Does the demand for that, I assume, justify adding an art teacher?
Yeah, I can speak to that. I can speak to that, Mr. Olympio. There's about 30 to 50 more students at the high school this year than next year.
Okay.
And the number of requests for art are over the top, and it's a very popular program. So that's the reason for the additional art teacher.
Okay, very good. And then line 1014, again, Dr. Vidala, I share the same sentiment as Mr. Hockman and Mr. Arnottis. I think that's a great way maybe to look forward in the future. I think having students sit in a classroom for hours on end as a form of punishment, I think that might be a little outdated. So I was happy to see that we're going to be trending in a different direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Olympio. And just, another point on that is, I just want to make sure people are clear too, that the people who are in those positions are not losing their jobs.
Yep.
We're looking to do something different with them.
Yep.
And so, for example, the high school has credit recovery. And so, as opposed to pulling somebody out of the classroom and removing them from their academics, having kids in a room where they can do credit recovery is much different. So, thank you for that. I think it's something that, as we looked at different positions, that was one that we felt as though through some retirements and reassignments, we were able to reduce. But again, as I said before, really saving people's jobs, but relooking at the way that we interact with students.
Thank you.
Okay, any questions on the high school?
Yes.
Yeah, Andrew.
Oh, thank you. I just have a few quick ones. One was in regard to the ROTC line, which is 1003. Now, this is just going off memory from last year, I believe, but I remember Superintendent Murtagh discussing basically the requirement of us to have 2 teachers was contingent upon the number of students who were signing up for ROTC for the upcoming year, if that sounds correct. I have a recollection of us going through a little bit of work depending on whether we needed 1 or 2 teachers at the time. And I was just curious, maybe Dr. Lord, I don't want to put you on the spot.
No, that's correct. This has been an issue for us for a while. As you know, we have 2 brand new ROTC teachers that just started this year. Last year, the numbers were around 60. And these 2 gentlemen have done an outstanding job. We're up to between 90 and 95 students that are currently scheduled into ROTC for next year. The ROTC program at the high school is on probation. They have to get over 100 students by October 1st, or the program will be phased out. So we are optimistic that we'll be able to get an additional 10 students. We usually get between 60 and 80 students enrolled over the course of the summer. We're hoping we can get a dozen or so to take an interest in the ROTC program and go from there. I hope it'll keep the program in place. I can't imagine Peabody Veterans Memorial High School not having an ROTC program, but that's just me.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Any other questions on high school?
sure,
Yeah,
Mr. Mayor.
I have
Joe
one
Miko.
more.
Oh, I'm sorry, Andrew.
Mr. Notice still has the floor.
Sorry.
I'll go to you next, Mr. Miko.
Just a quick one. I was just curious about line, I believe it's 111. It's the business reduction, the business teacher reduction. Is that a retirement, or is that a lack of students signing up for a class in the business department next year? I was just curious as to that decision.
Mr. Arnold, we had 2 retirements in that department.
Okay.
And we did move one of those salaries over to the vocational to hire the criminal justice person. So when we get to vocational, you'll see that there's an increase there. Also, the consumer science teacher that you don't see here is just being reflected on the vocational side. So you're going to see an increase of 2 vocational teachers in this budget, but they're really just those 2 reductions from the high school. They were coded under the high school, but they're actually vocational teachers. We're just representing them there.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that.
So that, I'm sure you understand, that number doesn't represent one salary. It represents 2 salary decreases of retirements with a net decrease of 1 position.
Thank you.
Moving on from.
Hold on, Mr. Scanlon. Mr. Miko, I'll go to you.
Sure, thank you. Through the chair to whoever could answer this question. I believe on the ROTC, the 2 instructors, the 2 teachers, depending on what branch they belong to, I believe on that, either through Joe or Lord.
Mr. Amico, I'm sorry you cut out there. Could you just repeat that question?
Sure. On the thank you. On the 2 ROTC teachers, I believe depending on what branch they belong to, they do receive a part of the salary from the branch, because I do remember the Air Force was part of that a couple of years ago.
That's correct.
Salary. Could you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, there's a split salary for both. I believe it's 50-50. I could check on the number, but I believe we cover half of the salary, they cover half of the salary, and it marries up against our teacher salaries. I don't know the details of that, but I do know it is a split between the Air Force and us.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make that clear to everyone who's out there who might be watching and thinking about salaries, that we are getting a benefit from obviously having the ROTC program, but also that part of the salaries are paid outside as well.
That's a good point. Thank you. It's a good reminder.
Through the mayor, just to further on that, the salaries are generated by the federal government HR department, not based on teacher scales.
Oh, thanks for clarifying, Mr. Farrell.
Any other questions on the high school?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Mr. Hockman.
I have quite a few. And Mr. Miko cut out a little bit on me. Seems like we're having difficulties with the internet service in this side of town. But on the ROTC line, I want to point out too, I think that the federal government picks up the benefits for the 2 teachers. We don't pay any benefits for them.
I believe that's correct.
That's
Yeah.
correct. That is correct.
So if I can go to line 1004, the English, it looks like we have an increase of 1 FTE. Do we have a retirement and or are there 2 retirements there and 1 replacement? Because the percentage increase seems pretty low for a new staff member.
We are bringing in 1 additional English teacher. Again, it's due to the increased enrollment at the high school. This is one of the core classes that they would need, and that's the reason it's increased, because there's more kids coming to the high schools. We're probably going to land somewhere between 60 and 80 more students next year than we have right now, and those kids have to go someplace, and English is one of the places they go.
No. Dr. Lord, through the chair to you, I don't dispute the increase in the FTE. It just seems that the the percentage for, well, maybe it's because there's so many teachers in that line.
Yeah, there's a lot of teachers there.
If you look at the line below, and the increase of 33,000 for 15 teachers at about 2.8%. So if you look at a similar increase plus a new teacher around 65,000, we'd be right about there.
Fair enough.
Thanks, Doug.
Going to line 1008, Dr. Lord, your explanation to, I think it was Mr. Arnottis, I cut out. I didn't hear that explanation.
Oh, the same thing. I mean, if we have somewhere between 60 and 100 more students, if you break it into, but let's take 70 students. We have break it into 3 classes of roughly 25. That's 3 teachers. The kids have to go someplace. So art is a very popular program. There was more course requests for art than we could actually have seats for. Adding that additional art position allows us to meet the interest in art. It's also a Mass Core requirement. We're not currently a Mass Core high school, but art is one of those Mass Core components.
Before I move on to other lines in the high school, I will tell you that that's one increase that I will not support. If we're looking at, Dr. Vidala, we talked earlier about elementary schools, kindergarten classes, and being 24 and 23.3. Frankly, I think, although I appreciate the arts and the programs that are available to high school, I think that's one FTE that we could use better spend in other areas.
We can certainly look at that. Having an additional art teacher at the high school does give us some flexibility around higher level courses, digital art, things like that, that are a little bit more college centered, give kids different pathways to careers. So it is something we can look at. The issue was that the high school was a significant increase. If you look at percentages wise, they were having a bigger decrease almost across the board than some of the other schools. So we were looking to try, as we reviewed the NEASC report, we do know that the high school is the only level. Well, I know we don't go by level 3 anymore, but previously the accountability systems, the high school was one of the lowest areas. So we really wanted to make sure that we are addressing some of these needs and giving kids, opportunities for different pathways. So we will look at it, though. I appreciate your feedback.
Yeah, and historically, we did take some funds away from the high school because the enrollment had been declining. I do appreciate that it's coming back up, and we need to put some funds back there to 13. 10,016, the substitute line, we've completely eliminated.
Right, that's because we've populated these two. It's almost an equivalent offset. This is higher. It's like 130 versus that 100.
Can you give me the line number, Joe?
I'm sorry. It's lines 121 and 122 are respectively 54 and 88.
Okay, fair enough.
But I will do my substitute report. I'll pull all the lines together and we'll take a look at it.
So we're essentially eliminating line 10,016 from the budget, and we're replacing them with lines 10,021 and 10,022.
Right, and the reason for it is these DESI codes over here. 2324 is the code for long-term subs, and 2325 is short-term subs. Previously, we only used no longer valid with DESI.
Yep. Line 10,032. There's a dramatic decrease in the accreditation line.
Yeah, accreditation is a yearly fee typically. Last year, since we had to pay for a team of 15 people to come and spend that time, we budgeted more last year, 44,000. We don't need to spend that this coming year. The 9,000 will be more than adequate to cover the yearly fee.
That's what I suspected, but then I look back to fiscal year 19, which we would probably have similar staffing to fiscal year 21, and again, it's not a lot of dollars, but percentage-wise, a significant increase.
So we do have a little difference, though, because we have a report that's due in February, and we have some other items because it's the year after the decennial report, rather than 2 years ago in FY19, there wasn't as much to do. Last year, there was a lot. It's fading now, but it's not going to be what now.
Is line 10,037.
Okay.
And I don't know if this is Mr. Magno's decision but instructional supplies being zeroed out.
Yeah, what it was is the this was an account that was created this year to acquire instructional materials and textbooks. The district has school textbooks, which is around 85 or so. I think totals like $65,000 we have sitting in capital accounts that haven't been spent in the last 2 years. So as long as it meets the criteria of capital account, which is outlined as textbooks and instructional materials, we feel we can zero this out and spend down those capital accounts in 1 year. And then we're going to come back in 22 and possibly ask to put some of this money back in. But you can wait to say no until next year.
I thank you again, Mr. Scanlon, through the mayor to you, and for that explanation. I do draw a distinction between textbooks and consumable materials, and capital expenditures for textbooks is something that this mayor and I think his predecessor, Mayor Bonfanti, have allowed for textbooks to be put into capital expenditures, even on the city side, and we've been grateful for that. But consumables are a different animal, and I just want to be careful that we are adhering to capital expenditure requirements, and I think it requires the materials to be used more than 3 years, I think was the standard that I last heard. So if we can just make sure that we need to buy instructional supplies. We need kids to have materials to learn and teachers to be able to utilize. So that caught my eye as being somewhat curious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to expand on your point is that it is extremely impressive for the city to have additional appropriations for the schools through the capital fund. My experience here in other districts is the capital name, it's a misnomer. It means additional funding, but all the funds are not required to meet the GAP and the GASB requirements to be a capital product. So we're going to tap into that, and we can give you an update later on in the year. Any other questions on the high school?
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you. So overall, the high school is up, as you said, about 160, mostly from getting that position back in. The moving on until the where'd we go? The Learning Center, no change, same dollar. I just corrected these columns over here. The percentages weren't working the right way. Moving on to vocational. This is an area that we had to make some changes. There were 2 positions that I had not included. We had talked about them. They were on the worksheet, but I hadn't included them. One, we actually talked about last night, is the criminal justice teacher. So that's a 1 FTE. The other is an existing teacher who's in vocational CTE in the high school. She's dropping out of the high school count, I can't think of the right way to say it, and 0.6 of salaries coming into the vocational appropriation. So that's what those 2 changes are. Overall, as we talked about last night, a large increase in the number of participants, and then the criminal justice isn't even established as a line yet. We fully anticipate these numbers to really explode next year.
I want to compliment the CTE team. They've done an extraordinary job. Sitting in front of a vocationally licensed teacher brings us an additional $5,000 beyond the standard student. So it's really great that we have so many kids involved in vocational education in the high school. It's really excellent. They've done a wonderful job this year preparing for the coming year.
Thank you, Dr. Lord. Since you mentioned, Maria reminded me, this is a correction. What it is percentages of her salaries are paid into 3 different areas: the general fund, the vocational revolving fund, and the Perkins grant. So this is an accurate representation of the portion that's charged to the general fund. Yeah. Any questions on vocational?
I actually had a question for the previous page for the Learning Academy, if we could jump back there quick. Sorry about that.
Nope, no problem.
Thank you. And this may be more for Dr. Vidala. I'm just curious. I know we're having nearly a 30% increase to the Learning Academy. And we're making, that reduction in supplies. It doesn't look like the FTEs are changing. And I'm just curious, has that been considered? Have we thought about potentially adding someone up there? And, has Dr. Bedard been consulted with this? I'm just curious on the thinking, because that's, a sizable increase for that school.
Yes, and so I think what that represents is he identified that decrease, and it was a decrease, I believe, in technology, and we had accounted for technology in the ESS-ER grant, where we could maybe supplement this, and we also had talked to Chris Miller as well. So we do see with the current pandemic has showed us with remote learning that there are more opportunities for maybe less paper supplies and more technology. So we can use some of the emergency relief funds in that. And, Mr. Bedard has talked to Mr. Magno as well about how the high school can utilize the Peabody Learning Academy and support them as well. But we see more online learning or more computer-based learning. I know they do Edgenuity and a couple other things. So instead of doing consumables, maybe buying some more technology to support some of the work that they're doing. But they'll be definitely involved in some of the conversations. And he did identify this as an area that could be decreased, and we had identified some of the ESSA funds as something that could support that through emergency relief.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, scrolling through vocational, we had visited.
Yep. Mr. Scanlon.
Okay.
Again, through the mayor to you with regard to the vocational budget. And I appreciate and echo Dr. Lord's words for this department and the incredible work that they are doing and continue to do to encourage students to participate in vocational education and to continue to keep it exciting and draw on new programs to support what kids are looking to do. So I'll start with the director's line. I think, Mr. Scanlon, you said that Ms. Ferry's salary, part of it comes from the Perkins grant?
Yeah, it's she's actually working part-time. So, I mean, this actually should be a 0.5. I didn't notice it till now. So if this is her total salary, only this portion is charged to the general fund. The majority of her salary is charged to the grant and the revolving fund. Larger portions, this is an extremely small portion of that amount. Yeah. So she's not getting a reduction. She is getting a reduction by her choice. She's retired, so she has been working less.
No, I first of all, I appreciate Ms. Ferry. She's a good friend and someone who came back to the district to help out after we had a transfer out. And she did come back as a retiree at a less than full-time FTE. So I appreciate that. I understand your explanation as to the how her salary is allocated. My question is regard to some of her salary is allocated to the Perkins grant, and I'm just want to understand how stable of a grant that is. Is that something that we anticipate to be? Is that a year-over-year grant that we get just as a matter of course, or is it something we apply for? Is it a multi-year grant?
It's the vocational grant.
Yeah, it's a vocational grant. I'm just trying to open my information. I'm sorry, I forget I'm sharing the screen. The grant is available in a consistent amount every year. Peabody has an excellent vocational program, so we qualify for the grant. I know Perkins has been on for decades, so I'm anticipating that it will continue to be available.
Okay, so when I see in fiscal year 19 and fiscal year 20, it seems like all of the director's salary came from our budget.
Yes.
Okay. And
I mean, that is inaccurate. As I said, this should be a 0.5. He's working part-time, so.
No, but the budget amount, I mean, I think 54,000 is probably pretty accurate.
Okay. Any other questions on vocational?
I'm sorry, you cut out again, or I cut out. So these, I'm not looking at the FTEs, I'm looking at the dollar amounts.
Yep.
I think that those are fairly representative of what the salaries were in those lines. and we're now taking money that we receive year after year from a Perkins grant and using it for salary. So my question is, what are we taking money away from to reallocate the grant to cover some of the director's salary?
I'd have to delve into the Perkins grant is higher this year than it was in the prior year. Her salary in the grant is paid into the same line as the teachers. She does participate in some of the class activities. I'd have to take a look at the specifics to see what the difference is from one year to the next.
Okay, and then I got, again, through the mayor to Mr. Scanlon, I got your explanation on line 12,003. We have a shift of one teacher, I think from consumer sciences into this line. And then we have an addition of criminal justice, an additional staff member coming for criminal justice.
Exactly.
And which should bring additional Chapter 74 money.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That number 391 is going to go up by 50 at least next year.
Okay. And at some point, can we see what, I don't even know if we know it yet, because I don't know if the state's determined it yet, what our Chapter 74 allocation will be?
It's a question for Mr. Scanlon. I know it's in flux now, but Mr. Scanlon, maybe you have some more details?
Right, no, I can't comment on it. Let me pull that information.
Yeah, at some point when it comes through, I realize that the state's tardy with their budgeting too, under the circumstances, it's understandable. But if there's extra money coming in, Chapter 74 money should go, all of it should be coming to the school. It doesn't
Absolutely.
doesn't go to the city general fund like Chapter 70 money. So I'm just hoping that there may be some more funds available with this increased vocational program for us to spend.
Yeah, well, here's a good example. The 391 from October 1st is a 100 student increase over the number of coded kids that are currently in CTE programs. That, when you do the math, I mean, 100 more kids at $5,000 more per kid, that's another $500,000 just because of the 100 more kids sitting in CTE. I mean, that was a big thing. So that should be coming to us next year.
Yep. And I think my last question for the vocational line is 12,008. Is that an error? And it's a 716% increase?
I think there's a decimal point.
Yeah, well, it has to do with a very small baseline. So, I mean, it is a 7,000% increase, but it really, not necessary to show that. It's just increasing this 1 year activity to replenish the forms.
So, okay, so we use this as a place to save some funds.
I'm just grabbing my calculator, but 7,000 increase over 1,000.
Again, it's not a lot of money, but if we had surplus forms in the past and we use them and now we've exhausted that and we need to replace them, I can understand that.
Right.
That's what you're saying we're doing?
Yeah, it is. And actually, that's one math calculation that does work out.
Yeah.
As silly as it looks, yes, it is accurate.
Okay, thank you.
All right, anything else on vocational?
Yes. Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I would just like to say, it is aside from our budget discussion, but it is in line with what was just talked about. The Chapter 74 funding that comes in for vocational education, going forward, I am going to request that we have a discussion on that further down the line, because I'd like to see where the Chapter 74 funds are utilized, because a lot of those funds need to go back into our CTE program to maintain the equipment, the staffing, and to maintain the full program.
Exactly.
Because that was the downfall previously to the Peabody vocational program, and I don't want that to happen again. So, sometime in the fall, when those funds come in, I'd like to see how they are distributed and where they go. Thank you.
Sure. I'll make sure I get an update so I can answer that question. Any other questions on vocational? Okay, scrolling on. Next one is curriculum development. As we mentioned, no change in this one. We had put the SOA Act plan in here, but it's all been backed out. I think I talked about this. This is a credit that one of the offsets moved it to the district-wide accounts, and I'll cover that when we get over there. And mathematically, it has to show as an increase difference, but there's no money in the budget. Performing arts, also known as music, but we think we want to rename the appropriation performing arts. This is no change as last night. Any questions, comments on performing arts?
Yeah. Mr. Scanlon, through the mayor, line 15,004. It's, again, a small dollar amount, significant percentage amount, but looking at it year over year, going back to fiscal year 19 to fiscal year 21, it's an increase of about 130%. Are we doing, are there any other?
I think this was a
I don't
contractual
think the
thing.
stipend.
I think it was a contractual thing, Mr. Hochman. It was a difference in the stipends that were in the contract.
Yeah, they went up, but I think they were already up in 2019. I know we increased them in the last contract.
It might be additional people receiving the same stipends. I'm not sure it's the marching stipends.
Yes, that's what it is, marching.
Okay. I'm not sure how many people we have receiving those stipends. I do recall having the conversation with the director, John Simmons, and he explained it. I don't recall exactly what his answer was. Mr. Scanlon, do you remember? I thought it had to do with a contractual obligation. But we can get an answer for you on that.
Yeah, I don't need an answer. When you can get it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know we discussed it with him, but I don't recall the answer.
As I remember the discussions with Mr. Simmons, he does a great job. All managing directors do with their budgets. A lot of activity, a lot of more involvement in the programs. He had requested to increase all his service and supply accounts substantially in justification of all this new activity. But he agreed to level fund them, obviously, with our challenges. So I think that was all part and parcel with a greater interest in the music and performing arts programs. Any other questions on performing arts? Athletics. This is one I mentioned. I made a correction on line 16004. We have an offset in this account where we budget a decrease. Making accounting adjustments this year and working these offsets into the accounts. In athletics, we're offsetting costs to the athletic revolving. So we're offsetting our offset. But I had shown this as a positive. That's not necessary. We're just not using it next year. So this was a $200,000 increase. So that means that the budget was lowered by $100,000 by removing that. So overall, this budget is $100,000 lower than it was last night. Mr. Bauer was been giving us these counts, and as I mentioned last night, unfortunately, the participants' numbers are much lower because the spring sports were interrupted. But he reports, as the other programs do, consistent interest and increased involvement and participation in sports. Any questions on athletics?
Yeah, are we moving line 16,006 through 16,009 to some other lines?
Oh, yeah. Thank you for pointing that out. Yes, we've incorporated this into the transportation appropriation. So we could talk about it when I think it's one of the next ones.
Mr. Hochman, those game officials and things like that will be paid out of the revolving account. So as gate fees come in, game officials can be paid. So with its generating revenue, they're paying the game officials out of the revolving account next year because it's an account that gets revenue. So we thought that those were, game officials, the maintenance and custodial, the police details, all of those funds that need to be expended on games where we're receiving some gate and things like that, we figured that revolving funds were appropriate for those.
Okay. And then, is that also for line 16,010 contractual services?
Yep, same thing.
Yes.
We've, those are for my prior districts, that line, those services were charged to the revolving fund because the contractual services to maintain courts and fields are a direct relation of the activity of the athlete. So it's a perfect association of using athletic fees to pay for contract services.
So I'm just trying to understand this. When you say revolving account, are we talking about the user fee and the gate receipts?
Yes,
So instead of getting the offset, you're just eliminating lines.
yeah, what we're not shown here, and what Mr. Boo, I apologize, I never say his name right. What he would be concerned about is we're tapping the revolving fund that has a balance in it. In many districts, the athletic revolving fund is allowed to grow because that's where your source is when you need a major purchase of uniforms or, you know, something that the general fund can't necessarily support every year. So the balance of the revolving fund is going to end up lower next year because we're tapping more into it. We're not going to put it in deficit. It's just he's not going to have the balance that he would like to have in case a major purchase is required.
Yeah, thank you. That's what I suspected. And similarly to when we tap into grants for using grants for salaries, when we historically didn't, we're taking money away and resources away from other facets of that academic area that the grant is intended for. You know, we do, again, I realize that we're in difficult times, you know, and the budget is going to be difficult this year, more so than ever before in my 11 years. But, you know, there's a reason why those revolving accounts built up, Mr. Scanlon, and you identified it, because we're not going to have money for uniforms. We don't have booster clubs like we did 20, 30 years ago here in Peabody, where, you know, they would purchase athletic footwear and jerseys and things like that for students. So we may be forced to do this year, but it's not a practice that I'd really like to. I don't like seeing it this year. I can understand it this year and may be able to live with it this year, but it's not something I'd like to see moving forward.
We agree. We agree, Mr. Hockman. That's, you know, sometimes these things are called the rainy day fund. And, you know, this is the one time where I think that these are some of the pills we have to swallow as opposed to cutting somewhere else, you know, and some of these moving things into grants and moving things into revolving accounts aren't long-term practices, but they are a stopgap because of good budgeting in previous years that allow us to save jobs and be able to not see a devastating impact on the budget this year, to tighten our belts and to live through it, but knowing that in the future that we're going to have to go back to the good budgeting practices that we've had previously.
You know, and Dr. Vidalia, believe me, I appreciate all your efforts in the development of this budget, along with Mr. Scanlon and Dr. Kerbel and everybody else. And saving jobs is a priority for all of us. I'm just worried that, you know, that may need to be shared a little bit more across all the budget lines, and not just taken away from students' abilities to have a proper jersey when representing our high school, our city. And that's some of the stuff that we're talking about here. So we'll revisit this before we finalize this budget. But
absolutely, but no one's not going to have a uniform. No one's not going to have an old uniform.
Right.
We have had some donations in the past of excellent brand new uniforms for recent teams. So we will be able to raise funds if we need to. But I do think we can stand by this decision for this year. I don't think anybody's going to have a tattered uniform on the field.
We'll continue this conversation. I'll respectfully disagree with some of that, because I do know historically some teams do use, particularly JV teams, use some extremely old uniforms that needed replacement a long time ago, and we we do push it off, yes, we have other expenses that seem to take priority. All I'm saying here is I'm not seeing a across the board I'm trying to think of the right word here. I don't want to use the right word, but this is an important point for me. I'm not seeing the sharing across the board of some of these reductions. And I'd like to see a little bit more of that. And again, you know, we're just going through preliminary stages on how the budget's being developed. We'll talk more about your recommendations, you know, primarily, Dr. Vidal, because it is your budget, because I'm going to need to see a little bit more of that, and we could talk about that, you know, afterwards. And thank you.
Just a small comment on that. We're responding to your requests. I'm working on similar reports like this for the grants and the revolving funds to show you the activity from year to year and the rolling balances. So we'll be able to revisit this conversation and include the revolving fund at some point in the near future. Any other questions on athletics? Special education. Overall, this budget increased by this dollar amount right here. I neglected to include Carla's salary last night, which, as Josh told me, she saved us over $1 million. We should make sure we pay her next year. So again, apologies, Carla, but it wasn't shown. So that's an increase of 100,000. That's really the only significant change. This one down here, I just want to clarify because it shows up. This salary description here, that's not Carla's position. This budget line has been used for preschool director, coordinators. So I've got to title that properly. It's being budgeted, but that's not Carla's line. Any questions on special education? That's the only change from last night's number.
I think last night, Mr. Olympio raised, I think it was Mr. Olympio, and I apologize if I got this incorrect, line 17,024, the legal fees.
No, I had brought it.
Oh, Ms.
Yeah, it was. I meant, I thought I had the idea to add the note here is these were paid previously. This was in a grant, but it can't be covered. So I would just add a note that it, you know, transferred over from the IDEA grant. But it's, yeah, unfortunately, it's a real number.
So if I understand that correctly, Mr. Scanlon, the fiscal year 19 and 20 allocations in this line, we actually spent an amount similar to what you're seeking to budget in fiscal year 21, but we would just draw the delta from the IDEA grant. Is that fair?
And it's a fair statement. Unfortunately, this number combined is lower than that number, and this number combined with the grant is lower than that number. These costs have been steadily increasing, but we see that in every district that I've worked at. So yes, you're right. There's an overall number that includes a grant. This number does not include the grant.
So that change isn't as dramatic as that percentage increase from what we're actually spending.
Right, the two factors,
Okay.
shifting from the grant and increasing costs overall. Any other questions on
Yes.
special ed? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I
Yep,
Sorry.
please go ahead, Mrs. Dunn.
okay. Looking in this district-wide, as far as special ed teacher, it says we have one. And I'm just wondering, where are all of our special ed teachers in the budget? Are they throughout the schools at their location?
The simple answer is and I'll pass it to Carla. The simple answer is there's special ed teachers in every school account. But Carla, if you want to have any comment, I'm just flagging it because I think obviously the FTE may be wrong.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
I'll
Yes, I
double check.
agree that the FTE may be wrong. There are salaries for teachers in every school, with the exception of our preschool salary lines, and we do have some preschool teachers that are represented, that should be represented in this line.
I mean, this appropriation is where a lot of the specialists are, so I have a feeling, that account is what it says in admins. It's probably not accurate. We need to look at who actually is in this line and change this description, because you can see this is all specific to the types of services being provided.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Joe.
there have been some line descriptions changed that do affect, they've been changed to be compliant with the accounting practices in Massachusetts. So some of that has caused a little bit of adjustment.
Mr. Scanlon?
Yes.
170012. Special Ed Director?
This one here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that the one that we had previously budgeted, the Special Ed Director's salary, and then we rebudgeted it at the very top under Special Ed Admin?
Yeah.
Is that the same person or is it a different person?
No, this is not titled correctly. What the budget is for, this line is budgeted and we still carried it forward, is for a position that was director of the preschool program, and it had another title to it. So the name is not correct. Carla pointed that out to me earlier today. I just didn't have the time to change it.
All right,
I'm
that's
100% sure that's Carla's salary up here.
Mhm. And just one other question on the guidance professional adjustment counselors, we have 11.5. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, which line again?
I'm sorry, I should have said that. It's line 1702.
Down the guidance, oh, yes. Those are you'd mentioned that when we were in the schools. Those are the salary line that the adjustment counselors are charged to, and they will work in the schools. This is a department appropriation.
Okay. Now, are there any on grants in addition to these?
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding the question.
If I may, we've moved all of our professional salaries out of grants.
Okay. Okay.
That was the changes in the schools. If it's a simple question, I apologize for not understanding. I'm just not understanding what your question is.
Nope, I'm just trying to make sure that's we have 11.5. That's all I wanted to make sure. I didn't know if we had additional people who were on grants, because my understanding is there were people on grants, and that are we going to be at a deficit this year as far as deploying adjustment counselors throughout the district?
Well, there is no change in the budget for the adjustment counselors. The changes that we made in the grants were from the special education teachers that are in the schools and the paraprofessionals that are in the schools. We traded those salaries, because when the teachers are in the grant, we have to pay MTRS, but when the paraprofessionals are there, we don't have to pay, so more money can be spent on either paraprofessionals or other areas in the grant. So these adjustment counselors have not been paid, to my knowledge, have not been paid through the grant.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Okay. So the overall, the 100,000.
I had a quick question, please.
Go ahead, Mr. Olympio.
Yep, on line 17,011, the summer program, is that just additional teachers that it's going to be needed? It's a $32,000 increase, 24%.
I'll talk about the math. Our actual expenditures this year are closer to this number, so that's why I'm asking to increase it. Carla, if you want to talk about the summer program.
Yeah, so in previous years, the high school portion of the summer program was not included in the budget. We ran that at a deficit and backfilled that piece. So we did put all of the components of the summer program into the budget this year.
Okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, moving on from special education, we have the small account for staff development, no change from last night. This is where we purchase professional development materials and do contractual changes, services that are not covered under the grants. Custodial plant, still 0 from last night, but I just want to comment because it will apply when we get to the district office. There is a reduction of the 12 positions here. In the schools, there's a reduction of 36 positions. So the total reductions of positions is 49. And we factored that into our health insurance. When we get to the district office, we'll show you, we recognize that it would touch other areas as well. So no questions on here? I know we had a little bit of discussion on it last night, but it sounded like that was going to need to be a separate meeting. So any other comments, questions on custodial? All right, transportation, exactly the same as last night. We offset through the transportation fee, the same change, increases for the regular ed and the special ed contracts and homeless. The utilities we talked about last night, same exact number as last night, and also same exact number as this year. District administration. I didn't flag any changes on the upper portion, so if you have any questions there, these two accounts I had mentioned are offsetting each other. We did mention a budgeted anticipation of shifting a 0.5 FTE out of really the business office, who does a lot of support for facilities and custodial, moving over to the city side. Down here, we here's an example of, just while we're here, about the long-term subs. This is an account ended in a large deficit that year in 19. It wasn't even covered. So that's an example of how we've had to build these accounts up over the years. This we looked at last night. What I did is had the question, Mrs. Dunn, about the kindergarten offset. So it actually has moved down here because the grant has been not carried forward. So I think that was one of your questions. It hasn't been in existing. So we're not anticipating there's an equivalent chargeback equal to it. But all of these offsets, all I'm trying to explain is our health insurance net was 8.3 million, 9.6 this year, which you've heard that number is what's necessary, and dropping to 8.3, but that's going to be offset by a number of position reductions, which we've outlined, shifting to grants primarily. This is what I mentioned before. We recognize that we pay Medicare, a certain percentage in every employee's pay. Unemployment and workers' comp are factored more heavily. Workers' comp is factored more heavily for custodians, bus drivers, and cafeteria people. District pays percentage by employee of unemployment group insurance. So these numbers have been lowered. I think overall we took about maybe 60,000, I think, out of this budget. Mm-hmm. So overall that number is 50 is what I wrote down. So this number is 50,000 lower than what it was last night. Mm-hmm. Any questions on district office?
Yeah, just a couple.
Yep.
And they may just be, so some of these percentage changes, they all seem to be in red, and not all of them are negative. That just might be, it's getting towards the end of the budget and so for example,
okay. Well, I mean, some of these are red, but they are positive. It's my formatting obviously isn't correct on that.
Yeah, no, I'm just, that's all I'm saying with some of that. And I really didn't get a chance to get this deep into the budget. We didn't get it. I didn't get home till shortly before we started, but what 22,044 school committee dues and fees seems like a doubling of that line. Are we joining other organizations, or had we missed out on things in the past?
I'm trying to remember the detail on that. I think it was another organization. We had not been incorporating MASC, MASS, and MASBO, that we were not paying MASBO fees completely. Prior business managers went and paid meeting by meeting. This includes an anticipated full year of county superintendent, Massachusetts superintendent, Massachusetts school committee, and Massachusetts school business manager.
Through the mayor to Mr. Scanlon, aren't the superintendent's affiliations coming from a different line? Why would they come out of the school committee line?
It's the title. It's this number here actually no, you're right. That is a school committee. So we are intermingling. We can take a look at it. School committee fees in the 1,000 series would be for MASC, and then 1,200 for for superintendent would be the other administrative fees. I'll take a look at the detail. Make sure.
And then in regard to the detail, I appreciate that we got the summary or the initial budget version 6 today. Are we anticipating, or should we anticipate to receive the binder we typically get that does have the detail for each line?
No, it was a shift between the functional areas, because these two lines right above each other, this one's going up and this one's going down. So it's really the same structure. It's just being charged to the school committee DESI code instead of the superintendent DESI code.
No, I may see that. I'm not sure that I do, but my follow-up question was, we typically get like a 4 or 6 inch binder with the budget, and it has all the backup material for each line, so that we can see the breakdown of the expenditures for each line. Or can we anticipate seeing that?
Yes, we do. It's all, every location has, as I've described, 3 general pages to it. This cover sheet is on every location. The files are linking to the salary sheets behind it, which lists all the names. And that's one where I misspoke. We can't share that with you yet, because any position changes that we're budgeting, there's actual people names listed on that sheet. And then this is called the ordinary accounts. Every one of these accounts has a detail line, provides a history of what the budget was the last few years, and then anticipated. It's pretty detailed. Some of the schools actually get into details of different programs with instructional materials. So yes, long answer to your question. You will see that at some point.
Okay. And then line 22,048, it's something I've brought up in the past, and I'll bring it up. Dr. Vidala is with us now, and the mayor's with us too. I know we have a lease for 27 Lowell Street, and it's costing us a senior teacher salary to lease that space. I think we're going into the 4th year of a 5-year lease. I'm hoping that we, at the end of that 5-year lease, are no longer paying to lease space for the administration. And I'm hoping that we find space in some of our schools, primarily the high school, if possible, to house the administration, so that we can use those funds for programs and staff members. That's just more of a comment overall. I understand the need for that line in this year's budget, but I hope that we don't see it beyond next year.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on district? All right, we're pretty much at the end. If you want to go back to any of the locations, let me know. This is technology. No change from last night. I didn't really express that these changes, these major reductions here are really a one-time. We're going to be using money in those capital accounts to do this, but this has been increased because of the need to buy the Chromebooks and the cards. So we're building up toward what we need. It's a necessary, I guess, evil, for lack of a better word, that we're going to lower it, but we're going to come back and ask to put some of this money back in future years. So just an editorial comment. Any questions on technology? Okay, that's the end of the report. So I'm going to release the screen.
If you could, I have just a question on transportation, if we could jump back there quick.
Okay.
I'm curious about crossing guard line. Now, this is almost two-part question here. I'm looking, and unfortunately, I didn't pull my budget book from last year, the year prior, and it looks like in FY19, we budgeted 136 and change, and then there was a jump to 205, and now we're making a 2% increase to 209. So I just wanted to check on that, but I'm also curious how we're doing, and Dr. Kerbel or Dr. Lord, maybe this would be a better question for you. I believe when we were more in the winter, some of the principals were having to go out and check the crosswalks. The police were looking for a little assistance because we eliminated the crossing guard coordinator last year, which was the correct decision to do. But I do recall we discussed substitutes as well during that time. So I'm just curious how we're doing in regard to crossing guards. Are we up enough? And if anyone has any information on that, that'd be great. Or if you need to check into things, that's also fine too. I was just curious about that.
Andrew, we can double check. I'm pretty sure we had a couple of crossing guard positions posted for quite some time that no one's applied for, but Mr. Farrow and I will check it out tomorrow and get back to you.
Okay, thank you.
And also, Mr. Arnottis, I think there were some times during the year where we did hit some road bumps and had some cross-ups in coverage and things. So yeah, that after this, with the coordinator position being let go, we kind of anticipated there'd be some moments. So I think overall it went pretty well, but there were definitely we hit some roadblocks at times.
Okay, thank you.
Any other locations that we want to revisit? Okay, I'm going to release the screen. Thank you for your input and questions along the way.
Well, thank you, Mr. Scanlon. I know a lot of work went into that by Dr. Kerbel, Dr. Lord, you, Mr. Farrell, the whole team. Mrs. Chioda, it was great to have your input today and your assistance. So I'll open it up. We have opportunity for questions, comments, thoughts. Right now, I can say we have the public hearing set up for next Thursday, June 25th, starting at 5:30 p.m. And I'll leave it up to the council or the committee as to the next steps for us.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, please, Mr. Hockman.
Thank you, sir. This has kind of been a unique way of doing the budget. And again, understandably, under the circumstances, is the number that I'm seeing in the budget that's been developed in version 6 that we received today is $74,848,057. Is that your number?
Yes, I wanted to level fund the budget. Yes, that's my number.
Okay, and am I to understand that that's what you wish to have before the city council for approval before the end of the month? Is that number?
Yes, the number is what I need to bring forward to the city council, correct?
And that doesn't necessarily mean that the manner in which that number is allocated in version 6 that we've went through in great detail yesterday and today is the manner in which it'll be allocated. Is that
I mean, my feeling is the numbers presented to the city council. I mean, typically they'll have some questions, but the number is what is important for us in order to get the appropriate votes to submit to the state.
Okay, so it's your expectation, is it your expectation? I think you mentioned it last night, that we'll have, and again, something that's new to me, we'll be having budget meetings beyond the date on which the council votes on the budget number.
Exactly. I think, yeah, this certainly, as you mentioned, and we've talked about, this is completely different than what we've done in years past. I anticipate that we'll be meeting over the summer, definitely into September, and into the fall as we try to work these things through. We get some guidance from the state as to what our state aid numbers are going to be. We're still operating off of assumptions and trying to make estimates as best we can. And then certainly we're going to have a number of discussions as to how school is opened, whether it's remote, whether it's just full access or a blending of the two. I mean, all those things are going to have to be determined. So this is going to be a work in progress, and I anticipate we'll have meetings in July and August and into September.
So you anticipated my next question. So not only is it the allocation of the 74,848,000 something that we're going to continue to work on, but that number may change depending upon what we realize from various revenue sources, both positively or negatively. Is that fair to say?
Exactly. Where the two big things we're waiting on right now, again, is the state aid number. Typically, where we were before everything happened, we were expecting 30 million, 21 million on the Chapter 70 education, 9 million on unrestricted general government aid. We don't have those numbers. I'm hoping that we get those in July, but it could even be, we might not get those numbers till September, because I know the state is trying to figure out where they are with their budget and their deficit. So that is one factor. The other component is, with businesses starting to open now, the restaurants, the North Shore Mall opened last week. We just haven't been receiving the money that we expected to. So we're going to have to see how that goes now that things are starting to open and people are getting back to business a bit. So we're going to have to monitor state aid, and we're going to be monitoring what our local receipts are. So that's just going to be a continuing process over the next couple of months. But yeah, things could change here depending on how those numbers roll out here over the months ahead. And it could be negative, it could be positive. It's just too early to tell. I often tell people I feel like we're in the second inning of a 9-inning game, and I think that's just going to have to be a continuing work in progress.
All right, I have some other thoughts, but I'll hold off on those about how we move forward. Give other members an opportunity to express their thoughts.
Great, thank you, Mr. Hockman. Anybody else like to weigh in at this point with some questions or from some ideas? I mean, again, we have our public hearing on for next Thursday. We can set up additional meetings prior to that. I think we have to stick to that public hearing date of Thursday because the council has to have their vote by the end of the year. And I know they have meetings set up next week and also a meeting set up for the following Monday, the 29th. And then we'd be running into the end of the month. So open it up, council committee comments about schedule or questions about the budget.
Mr. Chairman, I do have a question.
Yeah, please, Mrs. Dunn, go ahead.
Thank you. We were given I understand about the bottom line. That number is the number. But when we were given this document tonight, I would like to ask if we could wait until and schedule a meeting for Monday to take a final vote on this. I would feel more comfortable if I could go through this, have a couple of days to look at it. If I know if I have a question, I can send it in to Mr. Scanlon or to Dr. Kerbel and Dr. Vidala, just so that I can, if I have any questions on the budget, I would like the chance to be able to ask them prior to that vote.
Yep, that makes sense, Mrs. Dunn.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions at this time? Please just speak up if you do. I don't have, I'm not seeing the hands raised. So if the committee is interested in setting up a meeting Monday, we can have Marge, we can ask her to set up, put out the notice for Monday. I'm open to whatever time would be agreeable for everybody.
Mhm. Would you like to continue with the 6:30?
Yeah, that works for me, if that works for the committee, and for our administrative team.
Okay.
So, Ms.
And-
Macarelli, would you be able to schedule a meeting for Monday at 6:30?
Maj, you're muted, but my question was going to be, is there time to properly post this?
Well, I think if we just recess this meeting, we don't
Right.
have to do the 48 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
That would be the best way to do that, Mr. Mayor.
We typically recess budget meetings anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
yeah.
Yeah, so if it's the will of the committee, we can recess till Monday at 6:30, give everybody some additional time. I think there was a lot of good work to kind of clarify and clean up some of the stuff from yesterday. I know there's still a couple of outstanding questions. That'll give time to have Mr. Scanlon kind of work through those and get some information to us. So Monday at 6:30 would work for me.
Mhm. So moved.
Okay. All right, should we break now? I know, Mr. Hockman, you said you have some questions. You want those now, or do you want to wait until Monday? Whatever works for you.
Just one question and then I'll move to recess, but what is your expectation in terms of a vote on this number? Is it going to be Monday or I mean, I don't know if you can answer that. It depends upon what develops Monday.
Yeah, I think Monday, Monday we can make the vote to have this number. The only problem we would run into if we vote for Monday, we'll be fine.
Right.
Sorry, I'm just thinking that through in my head. But yeah, as long as we vote on Monday, we can have we meet. It meets with what we need for the city council.
Right, and we have a public hearing that's set for Thursday. And is that prior to the city council meeting?
Yeah, the way we have it set up is Tuesday night, the 23rd, the council's meeting. They're going to take up the city side of the budget.
Mhm.
They also have a meeting set up for Thursday. Some of the city departments could carry over to that meeting at 6:30. We've set up our school committee meeting at 5:30. We'll have to work with Councilor Tom Rosignol, the president, and Pete McGinn, who's the chair of finance, but kind of coordinate with them. But potentially we could present on Thursday if the timing works. If not, we have that following Monday date available as well.
Mhm. Then I'll make a motion that we recess until Monday.
If I may just have one more question, Ms. Dunn, before we do that.
Yeah, please, Mr. Hartman, go ahead.
Again, because of the odd format or forum in which we're doing this by Zoom, at that city council finance meeting and at the meeting in which they're going to vote on our portion of the budget, will we be participants in that meeting?
Oh, yes, I would like to have you there.
No, I mean, in the Zoom context, we won't be attendees. We'll be participants.
Let me check. I'll have to check with the council and Ms. Danforth, the city clerk. But I think it's important to have us all a part of it. But let me see how they would like to do it. I don't want to speak out of turn.
Okay. I'll second Ms. Dunn's motion to recess.
Great. All right. Thank you, everyone, for your hard work. So we'll recess. That vote's been made. All in favor, and we're recessing until Monday evening, June 22nd at 6:30. Thank you, everyone.
Happy Father's Day to everyone.
You as well. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.